It's important because you're going to learn about your microbiome. So we've been having some historical times, right? The rains are amazing.
Good.
I think we're setting records.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, quite lovely. But overall, we're also living interesting times, and I would call them historical times for everything that's happening in the world. It's a complex society. There's so much that goes on. In order to provide for us on a daily basis, if you think of the whole sort of production and distribution process, it's pretty amazing. Things are, minerals and things like that are extracted here, they're moved over here, they're manufactured into something, they're redistributed and they're sold to us. We purchase them by the work we do elsewhere and all that. Food is the same. It's a pretty amazing system we live in. The other day I was listening to a program that was talking, it was a political program that was talking about the insecurity that some people are feeling around the production of certain pieces of digital hardware, like iPhones and things like that. The chip specifically. And the chip that we are now using in our phones is microscopic. And that the film or the material that allows us to produce that is produced in one country in Europe, right? And they have exclusive right to it. They sell it to companies in China and Taiwan, Korea, who then manufacture all these solid-state integrated state stuff. It's pretty amazing. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about way long time ago, when cell phones or mobile phones we carried around in briefcases, right? Huge briefcases. And we had this cord onto it, and there was a little receiver, and there was a microphone. We had to be attached to the briefcase, right? It's not so long ago. I don't know how many of you remember that. And all we did with this big package was it enabled us to voice communicate to one another. Not too far, right? Now we have these cell phones where we can communicate all over the world, and they can also process all this incredible information. And in fact, they could be a lot smaller than they are, right? Because of these microchips that are produced in the world. And I can just imagine having these little tiny phones, right? Hi, how are you? Oh, it's for you. Oh, I dropped it. Where is it? Right? Oh, that's a pin drop.
It's going to be in your glasses.
Yeah, in your head. So, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the library for making this happen. I also want to thank the people who helped promote me and bring other people here, who told their friends, I appreciate that. I think that this level of organization in our society is only a small, our human body organism dwarfs what goes on in society. The amount of communication, the amount of distribution that goes on inside of our body is like 100 million times more than we see going on in our society. And we know how complicated it is.
Really?
And so, this is what I want to communicate to you, is this amazing body that we have. But it's not only us here, as it turns out, right? There's this wee little people. I think of them as mythical entities, if you will. And I think they're partially part of what we see or imagine, especially when we're little children. Right? And it's the microbes. And when I was thinking about making a poster for the for this event, which became the microbiome, I first called it microbes, composers, and decomposers. Because that's what they are, right? They started, they created this, and it can at any time take it apart, decompose it, if you will. So that's where we're going to start. Let's see, I hope this is working now. Yes. So we're going to start strong. And what's happening in the world at the moment in terms of health, wellness, disease, is syndromes called metabolic syndrome. Often called metabolic syndrome, but synonyms could be chronic diseases, inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, etc., right? It sort of falls all in this category. Robert Lustig, I put up there because he's an interesting man, and he's dedicated the last 20, 25 years of his life to this phenomenon, the metabolic syndrome, and talking to people about how to correct this syndrome. And he says 88% of all Western society, industrialized society, have metabolic syndromes, which is a pretty high level, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason for that, he talks about the introduction of refined foods, processed foods, etc., which results in a high glycemic load in the body. Glucose, fructose, lactose, the whole gamut, right? And what it does to our body. And so what he recommends is that we delete all sugars from our body, right? 100%, and refined foods. That's what he recommends. But the metabolic syndrome also fits in the microbiome story. So what does microbiome, where does the word come from? It's Greek, and it's micro, small, tiny. Bio is life, and home, or grouping. So the microbiome is a group of tiny wee little people, right? And they live on us, around us, inside of us, in different systems in our body, and all the systems that we have actually. They live in between the layers of the skin, and our blood, and our intestines, our liver, so on and so forth. They're everywhere. And the studying of microbiome has basically been fixed on the gut. That's why it's called the gut, or the colon, the large intestine. But they exist elsewhere, and we'll talk more about that. There we go. So what is in the microbiome, in the gut microbiome, is all these organisms. They're prokaryotes, eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are single cell organisms, primarily bacterium, right? This is the whole story, and I hope you enjoy it. So, and then you have eukaryotes, which is algae, fungi, and protozoa. They also live inside of us simultaneously. But the focus of the study has always been on bacteria, both archaea and new bacteria. And then you also have mobile genetic material. Now these bacterium, as we will look at their cellular makeup. Their DNA is not protected like nucleus organisms, the prokaryote organisms that we'll look at, like us. Inside of our cell, we have a nucleus. And inside the nucleus, we have a nucleolus. And we have all this protection to protect the DNA. Well, bacteria, they don't have, they just have a cell membrane, and there's the DNA floating around in there, right? And it can actually come and go out of the membrane. And so that the structures, metabolites, and the gene sequences are present. And they do horizontal gene exchange. So they exchange genes with you. Hey, I like what you're doing here. Oh, can I have a little bit of this? Give me a little bit of that, right? And they have about a 12-minute lifespan. And then they divide. So they can undergo quick genetic modifications. You understand?
Wow.
Yeah. So how much is that in 24 hours? How many lifetimes? How many times do they divide and recreate by the process of mitosis? There we go. So this is an example. So somebody's hand, you just put it on a petri dish. And that's how it's cultured.
That's beautiful.
Isn't it beautiful?
That's scary.
And on the skin. Well, no. See, what happens is,
Like, oh my God.
it's a mystical experience. It truly, truly is. It's amazing.
Mystical experiences can be scary.
This is true. Thank you. So this is the impact of our gut microbiome. This is like the first slide that kind of talks about it. And so this is what it does. We'll talk more about it. But it provides all of these functions to our body. You would like me to talk about those, or do you understand what that is? Any questions about that?
Yeah, you can
Yes.
talk about
You can talk about
Yeah.
it.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
what is interesting to me is the bone mass density. That these microbes help to create bone mass, right? Who would have known? Any of this. Promotion of fat storage, so on, and we'll talk about how that works. Promotion of angiogenesis, blood vessels, etc. Development and training of the immune system starts in utero, actually, and when the baby comes out into the vagina. It's important for biosynthesis of vitamins and amino acids. Now, vitamins, supplements and all that are in the form of tablets and all that, they pretty much go through the upper GI without becoming available. So not until they get into the lower GI, which is also true about a lot of medicines. A lot of pharmaceuticals go down into the gut and are actually metabolized by the gut. Then they're brought back up into the liver, which finalizes the modification of it and sends it out throughout the blood system. The body is amazing. So, metabolism therapeutics, modification of the nervous system, breaking down food compounds, resistance to pathogens, immune system, protection against epithelial injury. Those are the ones that are on the surface. And they communicate to one another. So yeah. We'll go back a little bit to 1998. This is when, in the 90s, is when the Genome Project began. You guys know what the Genome Project is? Cataloging of the genes, the human genes,
Yeah.
basically. And then in 2012, that technology was used to document the microbiome, the microbes in our gut and on our bodies, etc. The metagenomics, it's called. A lady, Lynn Margulis and Carlene Schwartz published this in 1998. And until then, we didn't have a clear idea of how to classify and categorize living things in this planet, where all these different systems trying to be done. It's surprisingly late, 1998. But as you can see, the base of it is Monera, which is a single cell bacteria, prokaryotes. The next one is where they develop a nucleus in the cell, right? So they can encapsulate their genetic material, protect it. They could be single cell and multiple cell. And the rest of it you can see plants, animals, and fungi. Oh yeah, and also Lynn Margulis has been really, really important because she has modernized the concept of the source of life, if you will. It does not take away from the notion of God facilitated the process, right? I want to make that clear. It's just the process of evolution. And she says that the more complex organisms began here, and they are a consequence of a symbiogenesis, the coming together of these bacteria, right? So if I was to do this, I would put this on top and everything else at the bottom, because they are the parent. We have them, they're still with us. Without them, we can't survive, believe it or not. They've taken a bad bad what? Rep, yeah, vibe or whatever, with the germ, the arrival of the germ theory, right? The arrival of germ theory, all microbes were said to be pathogenic. We had to eradicate them. But the opposite is true. We have to foster them. And we've neglected them. We've been neglecting them. Our society, we've been neglecting them now for quite a while. But they've never left us. They're still here. But they've changed. And so what this is about is going back to addressing some of the original organisms, these bacteria that are in our system, right? So she brought about the theory of symbiogenesis. She popularized it. She didn't originate it. So this is a time when the Earth, they say, happened about 4.5 billion years ago, 4.5 to 5 billion years ago, and these organisms began around 4 billion years ago. The bacteria, the Eubacteria and Archaeobacteria. Now I'm going to differentiating them, and then around there is a particular type of bacteria called cyanobacteria that came during this time around 2.7 billion years ago. That is what you call a chlorophyll plastid. It can take energy from the sun and convert it into substance, right? And what's the most important thing for all living things?
Nitrogen.
Sorry?
Nitrogen? The sun?
That's an element.
Why?
Sun is important. Why?
Energy.
Energy, thank you. Every living organism needs energy. It's critical. And so these photosynthesizing organisms were taking energy from the sun and they were photosynthesizing them into manufacturing them into carbon-based. And so it gave food for the rest of the organisms, right? And so we began to have this evolution. Prior to the cyanobacteria, the atmosphere was methane, no oxygen. CO2, methane, some nitrogen, etc., but no oxygen. The cyanobacterium, through photosynthesis, began to convert the atmosphere and produce oxygen for the atmosphere. Now, most of life after them is now oxygen. Before that, oxygen respiration was poison in that atmosphere, right? So the cyanobacteria, they created that. And following them, plants began, and basically it was just ocean all over the earth. And then the ocean began to recede, and then plants climbed out of the ocean, but first they started in the ocean as algae and other things, and then fungi. But they say that fungi and plants arriving onto land were kind of simultaneous, because the plants in the ocean don't have roots, they just float. And so the new plants that climbed out of the ocean onto the land, they had to find a new way of feeding themselves, right? A new source, because they didn't have the fluid, the ocean, providing all these minerals and these nutrients that are floating around all the time. Oh yeah, this is humans, right here somewhere.
Oh my.
Right? These are the dinosaurs. Time of the dinosaurs and reptiles and all that.
Wow.
We're just a little ways into it.
It's a hell of a chart. Speaking as a graphic artist.
So this is Lynn Margulis' idea of endosymbiosis. So different cells, like aerobic bacterium and cyanobacterium, right? We know what that is now, cyanobacterium, the photosynthesizing organism. Cyanobacterium are regular bacteria. they came together and they formed a new cell that metabolizes solar energy into food and energy, ATP as well. And he also had the mitochondria. For when the sun goes to sleep at night, it can continue to produce energy through through respiration, mitochondria. So during the day, when they're respiring, they're releasing oxygen. They're continuing the work of the cyanobacterium, right? So the oceans provide about 50 to 80% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. And surface plants provide the remainder. So 20%, 40%. It changes constantly, depending on degradation and things like that. So this is what a plant, algae, etc. Cell looks like. So it has both the plastid, the mitochondria, and the chloroplast. And an animal, or I should say non-plant entity like fungi, protozoa, monkeys, people, they don't have the plastid, the chloroplast, but we do have a mitochondrium.
They don't have what?
The chloroplast. We don't photosynthesize. So, in fact, plants are the basis of food for the rest of the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they can take solar sun and they can convert it into food, basically fiber, and within each of those fiber cells, there's all of this stuff going on. So this is also a symbiotic relationship. There are lots of symbiotic relationships in the world. This is basically lichen. And lichen is a symbiotic relationship between what?
Fungus and plant.
Very good. Basically algae. Algae and plant. And there are different algae and different fungus that will still form lichen, and that's why you will see different lichen in different areas, because they're different species. So, okay. This is another symbiotic relationship, and this is fascinating to me. The ants, leaf-cutting ants, which are basically termites, have formed this symbiotic, a commensal relationship with fungi. Fungus is fascinating because fungus don't have an internal digestive system. They digest their food externally, and they share it with these termites. And these hills can be as high as 30 feet high. These are in Africa. And they produce fungus, which heads like huge. And I didn't include a picture. You can Google it and you can go find your own pictures, but it's fascinating. And they've been doing this for 20 million years, right? The question is, who's herding who? Who's the shepherd? But this is going on. And there are hundreds, thousands of other relationships similar to that. I want to introduce you to two different groups of people in the world. There are many, but these are people who live in an unindustrialized society, if you will. They're not surrounded by industry, whether by choice or by isolation. It's not for certain. It's not certain. You'd have to ask them. So the first group is called the Hunza people, because they come from the Hunza Valley. Beautiful. They're about 8,300 feet above sea level in the Himalayas, in the Pakistani Himalayas. They're interesting people. Their linguistic relationship is with no one in the immediate area. They're close to Tibet, Indians, etc., but their language is unique. In fact, it's related to the Basque people. You know who the Basque are in the Pyrenees? In France and Spain, right? So they have similar linguistics as them. Another interesting thing is they're blue-eyed and fair in the middle of all these, Asian people. Fascinating. Here they are. They're considered to be some of the happiest and healthiest people in the world. Women bear children into the 70s and 80s.
What?
Whoa.
Never
There are
heard.
claims that they've lived to 150 years. So there's a brother, there's the father to the brother's 78, he's 95. And there's a lot of pictures like that, right? They have an interesting diet. They have a different microbiome than we do, by the way. The diversity is different than we do. And their diet consists primarily of vegetables and fruits, seeds, grains, berries, yogurt, milks, butter, apricot oil, and so on and so forth, right?
Mac crackers.
Mac crackers.
Mac crackers.
They love millet, other things like that.
No meat, right?
They do eat meat. Animal protein is about 10% of their diet. They're shepherds. They are, whoops, bad. They are, they're shepherds. They have goats, probably, and they have yaks, and they also have horses. And there's a freeway coming up to them now. Oh yeah, they don't have cell phones, they don't have electricity, they don't have any of those things, right? And they live by this lake, right here. And about 2 kilometers from here, and this is where they bathe, and in rivers, you can see the river and all that. That's where they bathe, and there's their water, which is full of minerals. And 2 kilometers from there, they have a salt lake. Can you imagine? So they can get their salt right there. You don't have to climb down the mountain, go to the ocean. God was kind to them, I think. So here they are. The second people are the Hadza. So the Hunza and the Hadza. Confusing, right? I did that intentionally. A is for Africa, Tanzania. Right? So when I talk about the Hadza, it's these people, and they're hunter-gatherers. And they play in this because their microbiome is similar to the microbiome that we had when we were in the Paleolithic era of our lives, right? And we'll look at what that means in a minute. So let's talk about the human body as an organism, because we're a whole organism. So we're an organism, and we're made up of different systems. We have a respiratory system, the circulatory system, the cardio system, liver, the hepatic system, the nephrologic system, the kidney, etc., reproductive system, etc., right? Now these systems are made up of smaller little units called cells, right? So that's why we're going into the cells. And each cell respires, has a mitochondria. Mitochondria, does everybody know what mitochondria is? It's an organ, we'll look at it. It's an organelle inside the cell that actually converts substance into energy cells, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, mostly sugars. They could be fructose, glucose, but we'll just call them sugars. And that's called respiration, the Krebs cycle. So that's important. One more question. Why do we need oxygen? Why do we breathe? What does our body do with oxygen?
We need the oxygen to burn the sugar.
Exactly.
Carbon dioxide, make it release the energy.
Exactly. Only for that purpose. Oxygen is only used to convert the energy into ATP and allow us to consume it. Exactly. So here's the cell. This would be a cell inside of us. Each different system, the cells are differentiated, right? An undifferentiated cell is called what?
Stem cell.
A stem cell.
Oh.
So a stem cell is developed before it broadens out, it goes out to any different systems that it needs to go to, right? That's a stem cell. So you see, I'm not gonna go through all of these, but this is the mitochondria. These are these are all called organelles inside. Here's the nucleolus inside, and then you have the DNA wrapped up in there and protected securely. But as it turns out, we always thought that this determined our genetics, our characteristics, all right? The genome, the DNA. But we also have DNA in here, DNA in here, DNA in here. So we have intracellular DNA, the mitochondria. The mitochondria has its own DNA. The mitochondria is passed on from mother to child, mother to child, so on and so forth. And this is how they can track people, is through the mitochondria. Well, here is a simple bacterial cell, and as I told you, there's the DNA, loosely packed in there. You can go through these pores and share a little bit. But it has no mitochondria, right? It processes its energy needs through the membrane, through the envelope that surrounds it, not through a mitochondria. Here's a plant cell. So a plant cell has mitochondria, well, there's chloroplast, here's the mitochondria, mitochondria. So it has both. And this cell wall, membrane, is very complex. It's difficult to break open, to tear open, right? Some of you don't know who I am. I'm Alfred. I do Asian medicine. I have a clinic, and I also co-own a cafe and juicery called Juice Organics, and with my partner, Deb. So I talk about this because accessing the goodies in here requires us to go through the plant cell wall, and that's a complex procedure.
Say that again? The what does?
To access basically what's inside here, which is the goodies that we want,
You gotta go through it.
you gotta get through this plant cell wall,
Oh.
which is built structurally for protection
Right.
from those bacteria, those misbehaved bacteria, right? All those other organisms, opportunistic organisms, if you will. But it's also to give structure to the plant, right? You think about trees, like amazing, the cellulose, the lignins, the fiber that is inside of that. So that's what the cell wall does. And inside, like I said, is the goodies. Now, this is a cell wall of plants and algae and that whole classification, what we might call plants. And they are all photosynthesizers. So these are some of the plants. Cyanobacteria, the original 2.7 billion years ago, there are traces of them being there. By 2.4 billion years ago, the atmosphere was filled with oxygen, thanks to them, right? And then respiration became possible. The appearance of mitochondria and all that. Algae is actually, seaweeds and things like that are all made of algae. So seaweeds that we see on the beaches and all that, those are all forms of algae. They have no roots, they just float in there and they extract nutrients and they photosynthesize. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about a plant microbiome, because once you begin to see and understand this, you can imagine it about human beings. Because plants, you can see them from the outside, you can take them apart, look what's inside, you can go into the soil and look at it. But humans, we won't do that, right? Excuse me, I want to check out your microbiome here. Let's see what. We can't do that. So the only way we can examine the microbiome is with the poop, the feces, right? So we collect feces, and then we can begin examining what's there by the metabolites, and some organisms make it through, and they're in the feces, and we look at them. I don't. They do. So anyway, the plant microbiome is fascinating. So you see all these different microbiomes. So there's the air, the atmosphere microbiome. Those organisms are floating around all the time. And then the phyllosphere, which is the ones right adjacent. And the endophytic microbiome within the roots, stems, leaves, seeds, and pollen. This is fascinating to me. They never thought that the fetus had any bacteria while in the womb. But now stories beginning to change. It's difficult to test for it, right? But once you begin to take a look at the logic, you'll see that it's very possible. In particular, one group of organisms, and we'll talk about that. So, I told you a little bit earlier about the relationship between fungi and plants, right? Fungus and plants. And this relationship is amazing. So we've descended down there, right? All these are always there. And let me say something about the pollen and the seed also. So the microbiome is transferred to the seed, and inside the encapsulation of the seed is the microbiome to initiate growth of the plant and to create a biosphere so the plant can grow. That is amazing to me. I don't know if it's amazing to you, but to me, it's amazing. So within the seed has the information, and what it does is it tells the organisms in the soil who is to come around them and establish roots and all that, right? And how that is done is through the exchange. They exchange information. And this happens in the roots by well-established plants. This is constantly going on, right? The organisms are the miners. They go out and they mine the minerals and the nutrients that the plants need, the bacteria, but also the fungi. And the fungi are the most fascinating in this process, because the fungi will grow into the root hairs, into the phyllae. They will into the root hairs of the plant and have this direct exchange. The plant photosynthesizes energy, sugars, carbons, transports it down to their roots, and releases it to all the microorganisms in the ground.
They do business.
They do business. That's right, that's cooperation. Huh?
Interesting.
It is interesting. And what is most fascinating about fungus is that the fungus hyphae will grow everywhere. They grow into the rocks. Why do we see plants, trees growing on rock? What is feeding those trees? It's the fungus that can go into the rock. And remember, our digestive system is external. They can digest the rocks. Do you guys know who Paul Stamets is?
Yes.
He thinks that fungi are the answer to all the world's problems. He's wonderful. He's lovely. He trains these fungi to clean up stuff, cigarette butts, oils, toxic chemicals. He trains them. And the way he does it is he brings them to the cigarette butts and he feeds them nothing else.
Wow.
And mushrooms are so fascinating that in their DNA, They have a series of enzymes and things where they can go and they can figure out the enzyme that they need to break up the substance, and then to use the substrate to nourish themselves. Thank you, Bay. Bay shared a book with me from Merlin Sheldrake on mushrooms. Fascinating. So anyways, the fungi will go out and they will mine phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium, all the trace elements that plants need, and more. They bring them to the plant, and the plant does an exchange. They do business, right? It turns out, this is how amazing this is. It turns out that if the phosphorus is 10 miles away, because the fungus can travel that far to Nephi, and it has to transport it back, they get rewarded more than if the phosphorus is right here.
No way.
Yes!
Really?
A form of retribution, if you will.
It's called dog training.
That's it. That is what's happening in agriculture, in regenerative agriculture. That's exactly what's going on. So in regenerative agriculture, you never want to have soil bare. You want plants growing. This is why. Because you want to feed the organisms that live in the soil. And the more plants you have, the more variety you have, the more organisms you have in the soil. And a lady by the name of Elaine Ingham, a microbiologist, soil microbiologist, fascinating lady. You remember Elaine Ingham? She is cataloging which plants will get which fungi to mine which nutrients, which minerals, right? And she's creating a database of that, right? So this plant will get, for instance, cucumbers. They need molybdenum, which is an element, a mineral. So what she is doing is she's finding out other plants that can be companion plants that will mine it for the cucumber. And so then you plant the cucumber, and the cucumber has what it needs immediately. This is true for a whole lot of plants. So,
Wow.
doggy training.
Yeah, well, that's a different way to plant your garden.
Well, yeah, but the most important thing they're doing work in Europe where they're saying that you need about a variety of 13 different plants growing simultaneously. So nitrogen fixers and so on and so forth.
Interesting.
And then you can just go like move them aside and plant whatever you want right in between them.
Huh.
This is called no-till regenerative agriculture. This is what they're going for. Makes a lot of sense. Just the same way that God made it, right? It's the way God made it. We're just learning to emulate. So, industrial agriculture, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the three ingredients. They're placed on the fields for plants to grow. These disrupt the biology, right? If you don't need nitrogen, it's also in the form of nitrates, which is not able to be uptaken by the plants. It has to be in the ion form. If you can't uptake the nitrates, then if there's no need for nitrates, then all those organisms that produce the nitrogen, they go away. They die, whatever, right? Because they're not needed. They're not being fed anymore. So this is what happens. I don't want to spend too much time with this. Again, the same kind of system. So, metagenomics, and I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that evolved out of the genome project, cataloging the human genes. It's a technology that allows you to see the genes through spectrometry. So in the gut, there are trillions of organisms, trillions of microorganisms, and those microorganisms are interesting. The way you can look at these microorganisms is, since the advent of the microscope, right? We need the microscope to see them. So you can look at them through the microscope, about a 400 times magnification, and you can see these microbes, right? But in order to see them, you have to culture them. Remember the hand? That's culture. You have to culture these organisms. So you take poop, and you culture it, and you see who's there. Unfortunately, 80% of the organisms cannot be cultured. Plus there's trillions of them, so how do you do this, right? In my lifetime,
Why not?
or your lifetime, or everybody's lifetime.
Why can't they be?
What?
You said 80%.
Because they need very ideal growing conditions. For one, the gut is anaerobic. You know what anaerobic is?
No oxygen.
Absence of oxygen, exactly. And that brings us to fermented foods that are fermented in an anaerobic condition, right? We'll talk more about that. So the important thing about all of this is the metabolites. Those are the material that these microorganisms produce and return to us. And we'll talk more about that. That's what they do, and that's what in dysbiotic, imbalanced microbiome is missing. These metabolites that we need, anti-inflammatory, anti-insulin, neurological repair, fatty acids, so on and so forth. We're not producing them in our gut. So here are some more pictures of microscopic organisms. These are bacteria. These are prokaryote. You see minerals and all that. This is of a soil sample. These were hand drawn in the 1880s. Imagine the microscope came about. These people were so excited. Everybody wanted to get a microscope because this whole world opened, right? It's like the iPhone. Okay, so how do we acquire these organisms? How do we acquire this microbiome? Well, like I said, we always believe that this was virgin soil, and once the birthing process happens, the infant is exposed to the microbes, which then provides the seeds. This is amazingly important. And if you don't take anything else out of here, please take this. How birthing happens, natural births, the importance of mother's milk, nursing the baby, etc. It's for establishing the microbiome, which then instructs our immune system, right? Tells our immune system how to be. These microbiome in a healthy mother, this is from the mother. All these microbes initially are from the mother. And the father, because they're mixing, they're hugging, touching, sleep together, right? So there's this crossover going on all the time. When you hug somebody, you're exchanging, right? And that was one of my critiques about isolation during COVID-19. This is how all this started for me. This is how it all started. I went to look at the immune system, and the immune system needs to be exposed, to be reaffirmed. So not only are we exchanging superficial microbes, we're exchanging critical information for our immune system. Yeah, does that make sense? That's all how. Okay, so a natural birth is really important. The child comes out the vagina. The vagina is filled with microbes, which then the child takes in, and then upon exiting the vagina, there's fecal microbes. You just can't help it. They're everywhere, right? And this is life. The Hadza, I didn't tell you this. So the Hadza have about, those are hunter-gatherers, right? They have about 4,000 species of microbes in their gut. Then there are subspecies, there are strains of subspecies, so on and so forth. And then of each of them, there are gazillions. It goes on forever, right? They don't wash their hands. They don't sanitize. If they're going to clean themselves up, they take dirt and they rub it.
Oh, that's healthy dirt.
Well, it's undisturbed, hopefully.
Yeah.
But I imagine radiation has dropped from the sky, right? And all the soil. So the child gets cultured with these microbes in their gut also. The milk, and we'll see a little bit more of the sequence of how that happens. The milk nourishes these microbes into childhood, early adulthood, when, well, at 2 or whatever, they change to more solid food, where they begin to eat plant material, right? The upper GI is not capable of digesting a lot of the plant cells. So it goes down to the lower GI, to the colon, where it is degraded into these components we talked about, right? That's what they do. So it's an important part of our digestion. So the mother's milk provides the nourishment for the initial establishment of these microbes, gut microbes. You got that? No mother's milk? Nothing to feed the babies, right? The microbes. So this is the organisms that are inside an infant at birth, right? And sorry, the color didn't come out too well, but it's basically this enterobacteria. They continue on for a long time, but you can see after 1 month, these bacterial deci are introduced into the gut. They take prominence. That part of that is through the feeding. The breast milk is the helping to establish those microbes, right? And it goes on, and you can see, all the way into adulthood. But it gets more complicated. Some tend to want to disappear, others appear, they mature, etc. This is only a small sample of what's actually there. So let's talk about the digestive system and how this works in our bodies. So we take in food and drink, and we chew it. That's a mechanical breakdown of the food, right? It's exposed to certain chemicals, saliva and enzymes, amylase, lipase. Amylase is for carbohydrate breakdown. So it breaks down the carbohydrate that is not inside the plant cell wall, right? Unless by chance you break through the cell wall while you're chewing. Right? This is why juice came to be, right? Because when you're juicing at a commercial level, hopefully your juicer will break through the cell wall and then press it out. That is the value of the juice. So you're getting all those goodies from inside, right? Without having to go through the whole tract. So it goes down, and then, through the stomach, further mechanically broken down, exposed to acids, gastric acids, and then the pancreas secretes more chemicals into there, more digestive enzymes, etc. In the stomach, it's very, very acidic. Fasting stomach pH is around 1.2. I don't know if you know about pH, but that's extremely acidic. 7.0 is neutral.
That's not me, is it?
Turn it off. And then it's the duodenum,
Yeah.
the jejunum, and the ileum. And the ileum attaches to the ascending colon, and there is the beginning. The colon is where our microbiome exists, but it begins in the ileum. And then here, I'm hoping that you can see it, is the appendix. The appendiform hangs right here. Right? What is the appendix for?
Surgery.
Home.
That's the doctor's office.
We don't need it.
Yeah.
Home for those microbes.
Oh,
Fermentation.
is that right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Reservoir.
A reservoir,
You
exactly.
don't have one.
Well, they live in the surrounding area, right? So it goes through there, and then you have the hepatic venous system right here that collects all the blood coming out of the digestive tract, including the stomach, the pancreas, the spleen, etc., and returns it into the liver right here, and further processes it, and then it goes out to the rest of the body. Hopefully it will take out the toxins and things like that that made it through, right? All those meds that are being recycled, blah, 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 whatever is being recycled. That's the job of the liver. Big job, man. So these microbes, they live off the lignans, the cellulose, and what we call digestive fiber. Those plant cells that can't be broken up in the upper GI. And that's what they live off of, and then they release those nutrients back. They're polyphenols, antioxidants, and then they produce hormones, they produce all sorts of things for our bodies. They're integral to our bodies. Are you all with me? Want to go home at 7?
I want to detox my liver.
Okay. These people have been really helpful, important for my journey into the microbiome. And they're from Stanford University, and especially Justin and Erica Sundberg. They published a lot of papers, etc. But this is part of the team. Also the San Francisco University, they do a lot of work. But a lot of the next stuff that you're going to see comes from them. So this is what it looks like inside the colon.
It's pretty.
Here's the microbes, gazillions of them, right? There is the mucus lining. And here's the colon. So between the microbes and the actual wall of the colon is this mucus lining, right? That protects us from potential pathogenic organisms, but it's also provides food for the microorganisms at times when they don't have it. But if they don't have it for a long time, they disappear, right?
When you say food for them, it's coming through the mucus pathway. What? And you say there's no food for a while. Is that because you're fasting? What do you mean? Why would the food go away?
Because you're not eating fiber. Whole, complete, real carbohydrate. Unprocessed, unrefined. Because when you refine, let's say, the wheat berry, and you mill it really fine, guess what? No more cell wall. And that's released immediately into the upper GI, and you have this high level of sugars in your bloodstream. You have to have an insulin response to that, and that's all part of the metabolic syndrome, elevated sugars. Remember we talked about that at the beginning? Yeah.
But isn't sourdough supposed to be good for the gut? Or is
Yeah,
that
it's on my list.
milk?
So when
You're giving it away.
no. So I didn't even hear what she said.
Sourdough.
When you hear the word refined, you're talking about how finely it's ground. That's what they're referring to.
Usually refined
And
carbohydrates.
Huh?
Ground it's out.
Refined carbohydrates are processed carbohydrates.
Which means that the cell wall is completely powdered, and it's gonna.
Many of it, much of it.
And so, in a normal, raw diet or less processed, some
Not
of the
raw,
activity.
not raw.
Yeah, but some of the activity is happening in the small intestine, and some of it is happening in the
The
large
majority is
intestine.
happening in the large intestine, correct.
But in the refined food, it's that the small intestine has almost complete access to everything, so that's why you get the spike. Is that what you're saying?
Glucose spikes and everything else.
I see. Okay.
And also, where are we at now? Forgot. What were you talking about?
We're in Goleta.
Talking about sourdough.
So,
Sorry.
does the mucus, have nutrients in it, or does it just like make?
It has
make
some
it
nutrients. It's
transport
basically,
system?
it's a mucus.
Yeah.
It's like snot.
But it has
right?
some stuff in it that.
It does. It has carbon compounds.
Cause I always heard,
But
oh, we don't
they-
want mucus in our gut.
They create a microfilm with it and they protect it.
Right.
There is an intelligence with these microorganisms. So when at gestation and at time of birth, the first established microorganism, they decide who's going to be here and who's not. Right?
Right.
And so they protect from pathogenic organisms. But depending on how they got established will determine who's there. Right? So cesarean births, they're organisms that come from from the surface. Right?
My son would still be in me if I didn't have him cut out.
It's not a criticism.
My-
We'll tell you how to help correct that.
Yeah, but my grand,
So we're not,
I know.
your son and you are not that different in terms of microbiome.
so the ones that got C-section, because they had to, or else they wouldn't have come out, they liked eating dirt as infants. As soon as they could crawl over to get dirt, they
Lovely.
always ate dirt.
Lovely. Okay, so,
Solve that problem.
all right.
Put them in a chicken coop. for
So remember I told you
hours a day.
how they can identify microbes is through feces, right? So they dug up some old 1,000-year-old feces. These guys are crazy.
Where did you find it?
This is the Sonnenbergs. They also are the ones who went to see the Hadza. And they collected their feces, brought them back home. So this is fascinating because it's the new medicine. This is what's coming, right? Just like Elaine Ingham is figuring out which plants are going to be companion for the cucumber. We're going to find out which microbe we need to include in the microbiome to prevent Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on and so forth. That's the hope.
Got it.
I like the shotgun approach, in case, right? Just like, is there heaven or isn't there? Well, in case. Just in case. So, whoops. Still misbehaving. So paleo-feces are these brown, and this is the microorganisms that were found in the feces. And this is the microorganisms of the Hadza, the Hunza, and all of those non-industrialized people. This is modern industrialized nations. This is species diversity. That's us.
What's it
What are
saying?
the axes?
The axis PC1, PC2.
Right.
They're just different types of organisms,
Okay.
basically.
So those are all fecal samples.
All fecal samples. Yeah.
So whatever
Oh, yeah, so-
PC1 is we're all on the left of the PC1 axis, all the moderns.
Remember Robert at the very beginning? I introduced him.
Yeah.
He was invited to go speak to a a pharmacological company, right? He's a doctor, he's an MD, he's a pediatrician, he's so on, so he's got all, and people find him fascinating, because he's talking about the metabolic syndrome. So he's introduced, and the first thing he says, thank you for having me there. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. His message though is this, all these autoimmune diseases, all this inflammatory disease, all this metabolic syndrome, you can't use a pill for that because you can't reach it. This is his message to the pharmaceutical. It was like, he survived an hour. That was pretty amazing. Why does he say it won't work? Because he says you cannot reach the syndrome with a pill. You have to use prevention. And that's the re-examination of the diversity. Well, here's another one. Specific taxa. Here's industrialized nations, non-industrialized nations, the diversity, etc. So the Hadza have 4 times more diversity than we do. We have about 1,000 different species, 1,000 to 1,200. They have over 4,000 species, right? They eat over 100 different types of plant food regularly. They're hunter-gatherers, they also hunt. But as hunters, they're lucky if they get something daily, right? So they're primarily grubbers, tubers, berries, seeds, etc. And so are the Hunza, right? They're primarily vegetarian with a little bit of animal. And every day, the people who get to live to 145, every day they have yogurt, other fermented vegetables. And we'll talk about that. So, this is an indicator of inflammatory diseases throughout. Cancer is now being discovered as a metabolic disease, inflammatory disease. Most chronic diseases are metabolic inflammatory diseases. If you look at it, all of them, they have inflammation. But it was first identified in the gut because of Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, microcolitis, all it does, right? So they began to look at the gut from there and began to see the trends, and this is the trend. This is what's going on. And you bring along industrializing nations like China, etc. There they come. Asia, India, right behind us. But this is the Western world. You can see all the red, Europe, etc., right? And here we have these people. So there is a disease called Clostridium difficile. Have any of you heard what that is? Well, it's a colon condition where the victim is a particular pathogen, they believe, and they've and it can be fatal. And people have a lot of pain, and they also have diarrhea and so on and so forth. And people die from it. And traditionally, any inflammatory disease is treated with what?
Steroids.
Antibiotics, sometimes steroids, but traditionally it's been antibiotics. Believing that there is one particular organism that's responsible for the inflammation, right? There's an infection, causes inflammation. Let's destroy the source of the infection, the organism. So we think, like Helicobacter pylori. Do you know what that causes?
Yeah.
Pardon me? Ulcers, exactly. But you know that it's an important organism for normal metabolism? It's only a little like renegade that runs astray because the conditions are such to create that. Are you locked in?
Yeah, we are.
You can go there.
Thanks, Alfred.
You're welcome.
The key to
Bye.
the restroom though.
Do you need a restroom?
I do.
Oh, okay.
While we're on
Thank
the
you.
topic, sorry.
It's complicated closing down.
You can use the restroom if you.
No, I think it's locked. They lock it after 7.
Wow, that's weird.
Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. Anybody needs a key, it's here.
Thank you. I promise I'll come back.
Okay? We'll send the police after you. So, Clostridium difficile. Now we know that healthy individuals have a healthy microbiome. And they've done this with mice. They have mice that implant the organisms that give them inflammatory bowel disease. They take feces from a healthy mouse, they implant it into the microbiome of the diseased mouse, corrects itself. They do it with obese mice, they do it with all sorts of conditions. So they've been using it with humans for some conditions, but especially Clostridium difficile, where antibiotics have about a 20% cure right now, success rate. And this has over 80%, 90%. Taking my feces and putting it into somebody who has inflammatory bowel disease.
And antibiotics can cause that.
Yes.
Clostridium difficile.
Absolutely. Well, it is caused by antibiotics.
So special.
It is caused by antibiotics, overuse of antibiotics.
Yeah.
Exactly. So pharmaceutical companies are fascinating.
No, they're not.
Well, they know, they're seeing the trend. This is why they invited Robert to come and speak to them. They have to change direction. They're not going to stop the pills. It's too profitable, right? But they are going to expand to the microbiome. So what are they doing? They're going to pastoralists, these non-industrialized peoples. They're following them.
Giving them
They're licking their stools.
Oh.
They're freeze drying it, flash drying it, and saving it somewhere in some bank. They're going to sell them to us.
Yeah.
I believe it, because why?
But not to you guys, because I'm going to tell you what you're going to have to do.
Okay.
Okay? And you're going to tell your people, we're going to tell the next people,
Okay.
right? That's the way it works. This is why I'm doing this, right?
Sounds great.
Yeah. Only if you do it can I do this. Right? Okay, so where are we going now? Here's some more studies. Rising rates of inflammatory disease. I don't know if you guys can read this. There's diabetes, asthma, food allergies, allergies. The list goes on and on. ADD, ADHD,
Fibromyalgia.
autism, fibromyalgia, arthritis, all here.
Right.
The increase. And look at how quickly that's happening. MS, Parkinson's. Look at those graphs.
Wow.
Since 1970, since 1950.
So were those diseases completely unknown before that time? When that line is down there on that baseline, does that mean that's the advent of that disease?
Yeah,
Or they
exactly.
didn't-
The appearance, the common appearance.
The diagnosis.
You need the key.
You're on lock. And lock them both.
So,
But also-
yes, those people, this is why we study about the Hunza and the Hadza and all these others, because they don't have these diseases. They don't have cancer, they don't have diabetes, they don't have Parkinson's, they don't have any of those inflammatory diseases. Go figure, right? What the hell are they doing differently?
Shots.
And processed foods and poison.
Oh yeah, the whole combination, the whole gamut. Oh, we'll talk about that again.
But
You
they
guys
don't
are,
have,
you guys are blowing my end. I mean,
they don't have Pepsi,
no.
so there is a trade-off.
Absolutely.
I have just one quick question, or just like would it be fair to summarize what you've said so far by saying that these people who are by far the minority of the human population have a combination of
They're not the minority. They're the majority, as it turns out.
Interesting. Meaning, my point being, like, they have fewer negative stressors and far more positive.
Blue
Thank you.
is those poor,
Oh, okay.
unindustrialized people. And red is the Western modern society.
Right. So they have far more positive influences, meaning the gut bacteria that are within them, and far fewer negative.
You don't have processed foods.
Yeah.
Well, they
We don't have cell phones. Well, now they do,
Yeah.
right? And that's why we're seeing this happening in industrializing nations. This is what's happening to them.
But look at France. France is kind of cool. France, Portugal, and England are kind of groovy there.
We will see those in a minute. And Italy.
And Italy.
I think we may have passed that already. No, I think it's coming up. So there we go. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So all inflammatory diseases, blah, 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 you know that, right? So, okay, here we go. So the Sonnenbergs, most of the studies are done on mice. This is how they first discovered to do implants into mice. Now, in people with IBD, they've tried prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics. Now, symbiotics is both the prebiotic and the probiotic together. So the fiber with the organism included. Those have shown some success to a certain degree to correct IBD. So the Sonnenbergs, they decided they wanted to, instead of continuing to experiment on mice, they decided to do human studies. So they set up these studies where they had sample people would increase the fiber intake, right? Substantially double it, from 20 grams a day to 40 grams a day. That's one group. One group would take fermented food, right? That's another group. This is this group. Another group took probiotics, capsules, right? We're not going to talk about those because there was no change, essentially.
Because of
The probiotic people had a little change in their inflammatory markers, right here, due to if they had a high fiber diet, right? But it did not sustain. Now, if you look at these people, so they did for 10 weeks, and they asked them to eat up to 7 servings of fermented food or drink a day, right? 2 ounces, quarter cup, or whatever, depends. And there was a ramping, and then they did here 5, 6, 7, 8, and they kept on going. They kept on going more and more. And then they continued to do these sampling, right? And they're sampling to see the metagenomics, to see what is happening in the gut microbes. Right here, right? What's happening in gut microbes? Or is there an increase in microbes? So there's the diversity, and then there's the density, right? So here is what they saw. So when they had increased fermented food, they increased it, and then they told people you could do whatever they want, and they decreased it. See that? And this is what happened to the microbiota diversity. It went up to 40% increase in diversity. That's almost 3,000 species were created. And they went on for a little while longer, and as long as they ate fermented food pretty regularly, they sustained it. And I imagine they could probably grow it. And hopefully they could invite the Hanzas, the Hazas, and hug them a little bit, and mix it all up, right? Mix the world up. And here's the inflammation. Decreases inflammatory markers. That's really important. How do people know when they have inflammation? Usually.
pain.
Pain, exactly. More advanced, then you have dysfunction. So this is the fermented food they recommended. Can you read that?
Yeah, I have kefir every day.
Yeah. Kombucha, buttermilk, sauerkraut, and other fermented veggies.
So is yogurt fermented or just culture? Is there a difference?
It's a fermentation process
Okay.
of organisms, of bacteria organisms. But you can also have a fermentation of fungi, which are also a probiotic. And they're included in the microbiome. We just don't talk about them because they focus on bacteria. But they're there.
So the SCOBY
Yeast is a fungi. You know all about yeast.
So the SCOBY fermented things, that's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and that's why we make the kombucha and the kefirs and so on.
Exactly. That's a fungal probiota.
What's the second one?
Kvass.
Beet kvass.
Does anybody know what kvass?
Beet kvass.
It could be beet kvass. It's a fermentation. But traditionally, kvass was done with rye bread, like sourdough, but rye bread that is sour. What do you call that? Dry.
It's rye bread.
And then it's rye bread with pumpernickel and all that, and they put it in water, they break it all down, and they ferment it. And it becomes a probiotic. And then you can add beets, and it's a beet kvass, you can add anything you want to it. And it's a drink. That's a good way to use it, right? Okay. Again, here we go. Microbiome perturbations associated with disease. Dysbiosis. Here you go. And the list is much longer. Talked about neurological diseases, Parkinsons, tremors, Alzheimer's, so on and so forth. So here's sort of a summary. So in the Western world, we have about 1,000 species. The Hazab being, over 4,000. The pastoralists have 2,500 to 3,000 species. We have 4 to 10 trillion cells. We have 40 to 100 trillion bacteria in our microbiome. We have 10 times that in virus. Viruses are the same thing. They are our allies. We need them.
We die without them.
Yeah. They determine the expression of genes and other things. So we have 20,000 genes, and a microbiome has 20 million gene sequences.
Wow.
100 times. So we are an ecosystem with zillions of microorganisms. We need to cultivate a healthy microbiome of diverse organisms to learn to sustain. And how do we do that? What can destroy our microbiome? Well, we talked about that, right? All the factors, herbicides, pesticides, and also preservatives in processed foods, right? What are they preserving it from? And we take it inside of us and we strip our gut, right? Now, glyphosates are still being used, and they're extremely, extremely disruptive, and they're everywhere, because they've leached everywhere, right? It's the same as DDT and the mercury and all that from there. It's around. We're still finding remnants of DDT everywhere. I'm gonna go live with Hunza in the Himalayas. So, antibiotics, steroids, those will all upset the microbiome. Metformin, statins, most pharmaceutical drugs, they annihilate those microbes. Fermented food lists. You can photograph that. There you go. There's your sourdough.
You don't have tobacco on there. You know what tobacco is?
Topeka, I heard it.
Grain thing, like if you make this water drink. Did you do that? Yeah.
I'm sure there are many others. Those are just the ones that I know. So,
I have a question about the miso. When you say do not cook, so do you make the soup and then you just add the miso at the end, but you never heat it?
never heat it. All of those should never be heated.
But when you have it in soup, soup's hot.
Who has it in soups?
I
Well, yeah, but you let the soup cool down. You take the miso and you dissolve it in lukewarm water. But it should never go above 104 or 105 degrees. And as the soup has cooled down, you put it in. Now it's the same as sourdough, right? Sourdough is cooked. Sourdough bread is cooked. Right? So you think you kill them all. No, there's still some of them in there. Now why is sourdough? So what happens to these fermented foods?
It breaks down
The cellulose wall, exactly. And so then that's one thing. It also introduces beneficial organism into our system. So if you take like cabbage and you ferment it and you leave it long enough, it's just going to become gel, and then eventually that's going to disappear because the microbes will have consumed the cell walls, right, for food.
Could you have too much of any of those? And is kombucha acidic? Would that change your pH if you drank too much of that? I don't drink any of it, but could that be the case?
I don't drink much kombucha, but I don't know that I would want to drink so much. All of those are sour, they're acidic. Sorry. All of those are sour, they're acidic, mostly. And sometimes challenging to consume, right? How much sauerkraut can you eat? I don't like kombucha personally too
I don't
much.
either. I don't have.
Unless it's a little bit sweetened.
I'm being asked if you drink kombucha, is it acidic? And it could.
Well, if it's not sweetened after it's fermented, they won't drink very much of it.
But
Is
don't
it
you
sour?
want that sweetener?
Kefir, right?
Same with the
How much kefir will you eat?
I love
Same with the kimchi.
Is it sweetened? What stage of fermentation? Real kefir is pretty sour.
I have plain kefir.
Well, that's amazing. I say if you love the food, these fermented foods, to a degree, or especially the plant fermented foods, eat it. Eat it till you're satiated. Your body will enjoy it. The nutrients are pre-digested. They can be uptaken. And the thing that we'll talk about next time, I think next round.
I had to give up kefir and kombucha when I was dealing with parasites and toxicity because it fed, there are conditions where it's not so great. And I'd have to, and because in order to make kombucha and I was making kefir water, you add sugar to it, but it breaks the sugar down.
Well, continuously. It's
Right.
not immediate. It's the
Right.
food for the organism. Just like the fiber, the cellulose is food.
But it still was
And
too
sauerkraut.
sweet for me
Yeah.
at that time. And now I have to be careful because
Yeah.
it'll flare up. I've got Epstein-Barr virus, so you've got to watch out. You can't feed it anything that's,
Nourish your microbiome.
working on it.
So on June 1st, I'm going to do another talk here.
Good.
And we're going to do, and it's going to be sort of a follow-up on this, and a secret, how to accelerate the healing process. But for now, you go and enhance your microbiome. Increase the fiber from whole plant food. Stay away from processed foods, right? Stay away from sugars.
So are aged cheeses considered fermented
They are.
foods?
How are they fermented? Most cheeses, molds, right? What is a mold?
Fungus.
Oh,
Fungus.
So is blue
They're fun.
cheese
Yeah.
considered good for you?
Depends on the person. 'Cause
Depends on the
some
person,
don't
if you
do
can
well
handle it.
with-
But if your culture,
Cheddar will rash me hard.
yeah,
You
right,
can't tell
correct your
very good.
microbiome.
Yeah.
You have to you see, like the rest of us, we have metabolic disorders. We have to start somewhere. So there you go, increasing your fiber content. The Hadza eat 100 grams of fiber. Do you know how much Americans eat on average?
How do you eat that much fiber?
It's just part of their
It's
diet.
really hard.
The Hunza would probably eat 50 to 60 grams or maybe 80 grams a day. They're right behind them.
Like,
It's a vegetable diet.
yeah.
Now the other thing about the Hunza, for their longevity, women can reproduce in their 70s and 80s.
Wait, do you have enough eggs in your body?
They do. It has to do with their health and their well-being.
The hormone levels are sustained. They don't go through menopause.
So another important thing about those people is that they don't have many calories daily. 1,200 to 1,600 calories a day.
And they're active.
They don't have.
We have 3,000, 2,500, 3,000 calories. And they're active, it's part of life. Up and down, carrying, transporting, shepherding the livestock,
So
farming.
They don't get arthritis at all.
They live to be 145, pain-free.
What about their
I wanna go
teeth?
there.
Do they, yeah, do
They
they?
have
Oh, you didn't see the smiles?
crap in their diet.
Yeah.
You didn't see the smiles?
Yeah.
Google Hunza and see some photos. They're very popular.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Ones are well known.
So that's the key. You want to have a diversity. I am cautious with fruits. I would never drink a fruit juice because of the glycemic index, right? Instantly. Just like you rupture the cells to make the nutrients available, the same thing happens with the sugars in the plants.
Different than juicing.
I would never do a fruit juice.
What about fresh fruit?
When people come to the juicery and they order orange juice, I just say, oh, do I really have to make that for you?
So yummy. Why would God make fruit?
Does it? He never made fruit
He
juice.
puts it with the fiber that makes it so your body can.
Doggone good.
Exactly. The sugar is locked into the plant cell, and you have to break down the plant cell, and it's done slowly.
So don't put
Some of it is
blueberries in-
accessed in the small intestine.
So don't put blueberries in your food, in your.
Blueberries are not high glycemic.
That's what I thought.
They are or they're not?
They're not. They have polyphenols, right? That the microbiome releases back into the liver, that circulates all over, as we know them to be antioxidants.
What about fresh fruit?
Yeah. Eat them, don't juice them.
Strong fruits.
And personally, I limit them. Less berries. My mother died from diabetes, my grandmother died from diabetes. My sister has had diabetes for years. She just healed herself from diabetes. In Canada, she's Canadian. In Canada, if you're diagnosed with diabetes, you have to take all these heart meds. You have to. She's taking 3 heart meds. Blood thinners, ACE inhibitors, 3 of them.
What if you just don't take them?
You get arrested.
How do they know you're taking them? How do you know they're taking them?
What?
How do they know you're taking them? You could buy them, you don't have to.
You don't have to do it, but you know, those people are not educated. A few people are educated, and the doctors
Mind control.
are their experts,
Yeah, mind control.
right? You tell them, okay, you take metformin, you take insulin, here, 3 meds for her diabetes, and 3 for her heart, automatically.
Wow.
But you said she healed herself from it?
Yeah, that's gonna be the June 1st.
Okay, good. We're coming.
Cool.
But you can't do anything about type 1.
Yes, you can. Type 1 is a microbiome disorder.
They probably didn't get their moms.
I know a little girl who got it.
So So how can you increase the diversity of your species? That's the key, right?
Yes.
All these species that you see in the Western world, they're all inflammatory. You've heard of storms, inflammatory storms. They originate here. And they're sent out through the liver to the rest of the body. They collect in the joints, collect everywhere. They're known as uric acid and other things. They produce lupus, gout, It goes on and on, right? On three.
You mentioned, I'm sorry, you mentioned earlier that 100 grams of fiber is ingested by the Hunza per day, and you were going to say how much the average American consumes, but
15, 10 to 15.
more or less.
And what is recommended is at least 30 grams for men and 20 grams for women. My recommendation is 50 grams at least.
What does that equate to roughly? I mean, if you were to-
You can go Google
Yeah.
fiber charts.
Wouldn't that be percentage to the size?
And not only the fiber, and as you're beginning to cultivate diversity of your microbiome, right, through fermented foods, you also want to increase the type of diversity of fiber that you're taking in so you can feed those organisms. Did you all follow that?
Yeah.
The diversity, because they don't all eat the same food. So I love to be in the woods, and I eat flowers, eat leaves, eat all sorts of things, seeds, not too much. Otherwise, I may not make it out the trail. Right? Mushrooms.
That's a whole nother.
And so, when you want to increase your diversity, this is a little trick.
All the herbs and spices.
These herbs, these seeds, remember I told you the microbiome in the seeds? The nutrients in the seeds, etc., etc. All the variations of herbs and all that. They're medicinal. They provide diversity. So every time that I make food for myself, I play with how many different food fiber can I have in my plate, right?
15.
20, 25. A smoothie is great.
And you don't eat a raw diet?
No.
Well, where's the line between raw and cooked? 100 degrees?
So do you drink raw juice?
I drink a lot of juice. Oh yeah, I eat raw food, absolutely. I love salads, I eat raw food. Yeah, I eat raw foods, absolutely. I eat fruits, I eat vegetables. But what destroys an organism?
If you're making a soup,
No.
and
That's miso.
The cellulose will still go into the soup, will still come out of the soup. It won't be digested. But what cooking does is pre-digest the food. So you've heard of soluble fiber, insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber will not be affected by heating and cooking and all that. Insoluble. The soluble fiber will be affected. If you eat the same vegetables or fruits, the same amount of soluble and insoluble, the small intestine will be able to digest a portion of the soluble fiber.
If it's raw.
Raw or cooked.
Or cooked.
Yeah.
Soup.
The cooking is like fermentation. It helps softening the cell wall and making it more available. So I was saying, I love smoothies because you can put a little of everything in it, right? Kefir, yogurt, banana, almonds, macadamias, sunflower seeds. Wow. Look how peanut butter, almond butter. Look how rich that is. Not a lot. 1 almond, 3 sunflower seeds, right? Not a lot. I just want the diversity, the variety. Those are little tricks.
Thank you. Really helpful.
Yeah.
Really helpful.
And when you go hiking, graze like the deer.
Graze on what you see on the trail.
Well, you'll recognize them.
It's not poison oak.
Yeah.
Well, poison oak. I got poison oak really, really bad once. And somebody told me,
Yeah, the guys, the hot shots, they take poison oak pills before they.
And what are
go
they?
in.
what are poison oak pills?
The capsule that actually has poison oak in them
Right.
to build up.
So somebody
their
told me
immunity.
that to,
Russ?
it's the opposite. It doesn't create an immune response, it's the opposite. It calms immunity. It keeps the immunity from activating. Poison oak is not a disease. We react to it. But in itself, it doesn't destroy us. It's our scratching that destroys it because we have an allergy to it. By consuming, and this guy told me, just go eat a little bit of leaf and talk to it. Talk to the wee little people. So what happened? So I did this. Right? I got it so bad. I got hired when I first came to California. I got hired, innocent, ignorant me, to go clear poison oak in somebody's garden. And I didn't really know. People told me it's poison oak. Be careful, right? And I had to.
Oh my God.
I got it so bad, and 2 days later I went into a sweat lodge. So it was external. And when I went to the sweat lodge, it came inside, and it came out there.
Oh
my
my
God.
Wow.
I got through it without steroids.
Wow. That sounds terrible.
It was. But then I ate these leaves, and I talked to the little people. And I never went and gardened in poison oak. It was like, no. And I go around and I rub it a little bit. I'm not here to chop you up, right?
I'm here to chop it up.
Well, you build up whatever.
And I began to eat a
Resistance.
little piece of leaf all the time. Years later, in Big Sur, a group of us decided to take this hike for a weekend, 3-day weekend. We get lost. But we have a map. Back then, it's before satellite navigation, right? To tell us where to go. We kind of figured there's a trail here, so we started taking it. Well, it's full of poison oak. And the sun's going down, and we told our friends if we're not back, because in Big Sur, a lot of hikers disappear. And if we're not back on Sunday by 4 o'clock,
Call the cops.
come and rescue us.
Get the helicopter.
So we're running through the poison oak like crazy, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, this is it. I want to get it so bad.
You
Right.
probably didn't get it.
I didn't get it.
No, because of.
I went home and I said, I was going by, I was going, sorry, I don't want to hurt you, you know. And we were running because we had to run down the mountain. And when I got home, I took the precautions. I cleaned myself well and all that, you know.
There's an antidote you can put on. it's
Mugwort.
Mugwort, it's usually near it or mugwort.
And you can also pee on yourself. The antibodies will stop the process.
And homeopathy.
Okay, everybody's leaving? We must be done.
Thank you.
So, this is what they produce, right? Anti-insulin chemicals, important. A healthy microbiome will actually stop the insulin process. Insulin is the problem with elevated glucose. Insulin remains in the body, in the bloodstream, and it damages our metabolic function. One of the things. Also regulates cholesterol, and that's the end.
Very cool.
That was.
Thank you for coming once
That was
again.
a college
That was really
graduate
cool.
class.
I'm gonna eat
Quite
more
informative.
Great.
Yeah.